My guest today is Professor Dirk Schulze-Makuch, who is Professor of Planetary Habitability and Astrobiology at the Technical University, Berlin, Germany. His research interests include extraterrestrial life. Welcome, Dirk.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah, so thanks for doing this. I want to start with one of your review papers. There has been a lot going on in extraterrestrial world, so to speak. Um, so it's entitled The Astrobiology of Alien Worlds, Known and Unknown Forms of Life. I guess the unknown forms of life is actually quite interesting. So you say here most definitions of life assume that at a minimum, life is a physical form of matter distinct from its environment at a lower state of entropy than surroundings, using energy from the environment for internal maintenance and activity, and capable of autonomous reproduction. These assumptions cover all of life as we know it, and as we know it is also quite an important aspect, though more exotic entities can be envisioned, including organic forms with novel biochemistries, dynamic inorganic matter, and self-replicating machines. And so I always wondered about this, Doug. So um, NASA and other organizations have been on a quest to find extraterrestrial life. I remember reading somebody from NASA, I think it was like 2000s, mid 2000s, saying by 2020, there's a zero probability that we would not have found extraterrestrial life. We're in 2025 now, and I suspect we haven't found it yet. And I'll put my bias on the table, Dirk, and you can react to it. You put engineers in charge of finding something new. It's quite difficult because they're very good in processes. They're very good in. You tell them go to Neptune, land an aircraft on Neptune or whatever. They will do it precisely. But when uncertainty is involved, that we don't really know what we're looking for, engineering is not that great, isn't it? I mean, what do you think?
Well, and you need engineering too, of course, to find life. And to be fair, NASA has also scientists, not only engineers. But yes, with the definition, we kind of struggle because the problem is simply we have only one example of type of life on our planet, and it's very difficult to extrapolate then how different could it be somewhere. But I agree with you on one point because the NASA definition is a chemical system that undergoes Darwinian evolution. I find that not very pragmatic. If you land in spacecraft somewhere else, and for example on Mars or some other planets, you look for life. You don't want to wait until there's Darwinian evolution happening. You can wait for years or centuries for that. So, I mean, we would need something that is more to the point and more direct to look to really find life. And I think we have to be open-minded. That the definition you just quoted, I worked together with Louis Irvin from the University of Texas at El Paso on that one. And we thought that we need also to include possible machine life at some point when we could say, okay, it becomes alive. If it could reproduce basically building its own parts and raw material, then the reproduction, for example, the reproduction parameter is fulfilled in our view.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So the problem we have is we have only one instance of life on Earth. Although, is it sort of proven that we had multiple, sort of origination of life on Earth, or that is a speculation?
That is only speculation. That is kind of the idea is about it. If when life originated early on, about 4 billion years ago, or even before, that there were several attempts, and the uh, most hardiest form of life and genetic replication mechanism with DNA survived, and the other was kind of incorporated or were not making it. But again, that is speculation, because all what we have is basically one type of life that we can follow very far back, and so we do not know.
Yeah, so I have somebody coming on, talking about random mutation and natural selection might not be the mechanism by which evolution happens. And so we have set of ingoing biases, I would call them, as how life emerged and how life have survived and evolved. And if you take all of that and look for something outside the Earth, um, we have this biases that we are going in with, right? I mean, so are we missing things because of this ideas that we sort of nurture in textbooks and everywhere else?
Um, it's difficult to say. I would think we are missing something here, yes. With the definition of life, we are kind of on the same stage like 100 years ago when people were defining water and said, what is water? And they were kind of defining water by its properties. It's translucent, it changes its phases from liquid to solid to gaseous, and defined it like this. But today we define water, it's H2O or H9O4 to be more precise. And so we do not have that for life. So life, or the state of being alive, really, we try to define with what is going on with metabolism, with reproduction, with adaptation to the environment. So these are kind of the basic parameters, and that we exhibit some growth. The more sophisticated ideas then, okay, if you have a living entity, it's in thermodynamic disequilibrium from its surroundings, because if you're in disequilibrium, you're dead, you're dying, right? Then because everything decays.
Yeah.
And so there's different kind of viewpoints on that. But I agree that we are very anthropocentric. For example, I published a paper just a couple of months ago in Nature Astronomy, where I suggested that we might have accidentally killed life on Mars
Yeah, I
during
saw that. Yeah.
experiments.
Yeah.
And the point is that, we're working a lot, my group works a lot in the Atacama Desert. And it was found that if you pour water over those organisms that are adapted to this dryness, total dryness, they actually take water up from the atmosphere to make a living. You kill them, you basically drown them. You would scientifically, it's hyperhydration. It's not drowning. We only can drown, but in essence, it's drowning. And those organisms are already adapted to total dryness. And on Mars, it's even drier. And the Viking life detection experiments were done with water, because we thought, whoa, water is great. Life on Earth needs water, right? It's the most obvious thing. But with that one, we probably, if there were organisms, we probably killed them because it just was too much for them.
Yeah, so let's talk about that paper. So we may be looking for Martian life in the wrong place, you say here. In hyper-arid environments, life can obtain water through salts that draw moisture from the atmosphere. These salts then should be a focus of searches for life on Mars. The experiments performed by NASA's Viking landers may have accidentally killed Martian life by applying too much water. So I remember reading something about this, Dirk. So sort of the early experiments were very exciting. There was, seems like there is something there, and then they pump some water into it, and then the signals gotten weaker and weaker, right, or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there were several kind of experiments. There was a labeled release experiment that were very puzzling. They showed metabolism at the beginning, and then it kind of wavered off, and it was conducted with a lot of water. There was then other chemistry experiment that was very puzzling because it involved you getting oxygen out, and we still don't know really how to interpret that very well. The gas exchange experiment was that. And then was the pyrolytic release experiment. And that was supposed to show organic synthesis. Now, the interesting thing is that that was actually organic synthesis. The first experiment done was basically proof of life with a 3 sigma, the first experiment. The second was a control, and the control was much lower than the first detection. The further experiments were kind of unclear, were quite a bit less, were inconclusive, really. And then there was one experiment still done wet, where they poured water on it, and that was even less than the control. So there is some problem with the water, with too much water. And when Viking was done, I mean, the people were smart that did the experiment, and at that time we wouldn't have done the same way, really. And there was a GCMS, a gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, looking for organic compounds. And they only found 2 trace compounds. And at that time, they thought that was contamination. So the Viking project scientist, Jerry Soffen, at that time was saying, well, no bodies, no life. If you don't find any organics, there can't be any life. And they twisted basically the interpretation and say, well, it's inconclusive at best, negative. We think it's negative. Now, later missions with the Curiosity rover, Perseverance rover, with Phoenix showed there are organics on life. And now we know the trace organics detected by the GCMS actually are indigenous organics. So you wonder now what Jerry Soffen, I mean, unfortunately, he died already quite at some time ago, 20 years ago or so. What would he say for, how would he interpret it now? Gill Eapen, who just died a couple of years ago, he just was always his point, the labeled release experiment detected life on Mars. Now, I'm not saying, with this paper that there's definitely a Martian life there and that we killed it. But I think that is a hypothesis that we really have to check out. Because if there is life, I think it will make use of the salts of the hygroscopic salts. And Gill, also normal table salt, sodium chloride, is hygroscopic. And this is very easily to do the proof too, right? Because if you use, I don't know, it's still morning in the US now, or late morning now. If you have a salt dispenser there for your eggs in the morning, right? There usually you have a little, you have some other compounds in it that attract the water, the humidity from the air, rice grains usually, because the rice grains are more hygroscopic than the salt. And if you just have the salt outside, the salt becomes wet because it attracts water directly from the atmosphere.
So hygroscopic. So it's not just NaCl, but also calcium chloride and magnesium chloride and other things, right? So the salts out there. So what's the mechanism? How do they sort of get the water from the atmosphere? They're just reacting to it?
Yeah, well, basically for when we are in the Atacama Desert, we're seeing the salt rocks, and then we see actually those pigments or the cyanobacteria, the green veneer, actually in the salt rocks. So the salt attracts the water. If the relative humidity is going a little bit up, then the salt attracts the water and the salt gets wet. It can be actually getting so wet that it becomes a solution. Then we call it the liquescence. So it's a physical property or a physiochemical property, and the microbes take advantage of that. They get the water that way. It's kind of they're using kind of a physical trick to survive. Like, you have this little water bugs that run on the surface of water because they use the surface tension of the water. They use another physical trick, right? So life is very inventive, very adapting to the environment. And I tell my students always, if you think about life on other planets, you have to think yourself, be there a microbe or that kind of organisms. What kind of resources can you use? What kind of physical or chemical, so to speak, tricks can you use to survive there?
So the bacterium in Mars, if it existed, would have gravitated toward salts, and so what happened in the Viking experiment? I mean, we don't know precisely, but if you sort of shower water on it, you have water toxicity, so to speak,
You're right.
that kill off the organism, right?
Yes, yes. So that's what I think what might have happened, because we see that those organisms that live under those conditions, like in the Atacama, where it's only rains once every 10 years or so, are adapted to the dryness and just getting the water from the relative humidity of the air.
Yeah, so I just want to touch on the Fermi paradox, so to sort of set the context, and we go into more details in the other papers. So Enrico Fermi asked, "Where are they?" And if I understand this correctly, Dirk, I don't know a lot about this. If I understand this correctly, it's the basic idea that um, what is the sort of the scope of the Milky Way galaxy? Like, how many million light years are there? Is it in the diameter?
I think at least 100,000 light years. I'm not an
100,000 light years. So
astronomer, I'm astrobiologist, so it's very big.
let's say a few million light years. And then, so what he was saying is that if there is a technologically advanced society somewhere in the Milky Way, it takes them only a few million years to sort of scope out the galaxy and, go wherever they want to go. But we don't see them. We haven't seen anything. Um, and so that was a fundamental question. And so why do you think that is? Why is that we haven't found an extraterrestrial in spite of NASA's assertion by 2020 they will find one?
Um, well, that's what you're referring through this as colonization of the
Yeah.
galaxy. That was really von Neumann's idea with these little probes that they were replicating, then that go to the next planet and go to the next planet. But
Yeah.
the point is still well taken. Yes, that could have happened in several million years, even if you're still quite a bit below light velocity and the speed, or in a way how to do that. Well, there's books written. Stephen Webb wrote books like 100 different solutions to the Fermi paradox. Ian Crawford and I, we had in Nature Astronomy in January, we had a paper out, and we put down our two favorite explanations on the table. And actually, Ian and I bet a bottle of whiskey, whoever wins that. So, because we feel a little bit different, Ian was thinking that a universe is really empty, that we are not the only life, but if we are the only one in the galaxy, or if there's only a few other ones, there will be likely no interaction. So that is his favorite hypothesis on that. My favorite, I like the zoo hypothesis. I think about more like, in Star Trek, the Prime Directive, that they are out there, but they decided not to interfere. So you see it kind of like a zoo in a way, right? So so we are the natives and just leave them alone for a while and see what happens.
Yes, so two different hypotheses. One is the technically advanced civilizations are very rare or none at all. And the Sioux hypothesis, there is a technically advanced society, but we are like animals in a zoo. They just sort of observing us and seeing. I don't know if these guys ever going to make it. I would say very unlikely, based on what's happening. And so yes, I won't blame them to try to make contact. Um, but so let me say this, Dirk, and I want to react to it. So I'm sort of on the first one, which is I'm adding up all the probabilities. The single cell um, organism is easy to form. Well, we don't know. I mean, it formed very early. The timing of it doesn't necessarily mean it's very easy. Might have gotten lucky.
Yeah.
It's very clear that single to multi-cell happens quite frequently. I'm just speculating here. But the multi-cell getting to a technically advanced society is quite difficult, I think. So if that asteroid didn't come down in 65 million years ago, we've been still have all the dinosaurs running around. I mean, the objective function there was get big, eat, and replicate. And if the objective function is quite simple like that, there's really no need to become intelligent. And so it seems like a very, very rare accident to me on Earth that we are here.
Okay, I feel pretty much the opposite what you just said. So I think actually the origin of life is actually pretty difficult.
Okay.
Yes, it happened very early on, but that's were the only time maybe where it actually could happen. And to get it all together, that you have a functioning cell. I mean, it's so much more complicated than an aircraft carrier or any
Yes.
technical stuff what we build. So
Yeah.
I think that was actually very difficult. But I think once you have it, you're on a march toward not necessarily intelligence. I grant you most of the organisms on our planet are not intelligent, but toward complexity.
Hmm.
And there were several kind of times pathways, many paths toward multicellularity, and then to even more complexity, to photosynthesis, to a biosphere. And we do have a lot of intelligent organisms actually on our planet, I would think.
Hmm.
There are the whales, there are the apes, there are octopus. Some of the dinosaurs were pretty smart, and I think we do them injustice that we say they were dumb, but they had the more sophisticated one had bird brains. Now,
Yeah.
birds are much smarter than you think from the size of the brain because the
Hmm.
neurons are much densely packed. So, we kind of always take us as an example and say, well, they have a little brain, they are dumb. But
Hmm.
no, they are not. They are just, they have the neurons packed much closer
Yeah.
because they need to fly, right? So,
Yeah.
if you want to fly, you cannot be that big from a brain
Hmm.
or not that heavy. So I think there's quite a few different intelligent organisms on our
Hmm.
planet. But of course, toward technological intelligence, that only happened once.
Yeah.
So that's why William Baines and I came up with what we call the cosmic zoo hypothesis. So
Hmm.
that you have probably on a lot of planets that you have life, even complex life, but technologically advanced life, it's probably rare. I mean, there's the idea of the great filter, that there's something that maybe that makes us special, but we do not know what that really is. It is
Hmm.
very difficult to grab on and say, okay, what is that? And of course, if there's, like, let's say, a planet that is 20 light years away and it has, a biosphere with animals and plants and fungi and whatever on it,
Hmm.
we are still not able to detect it. We would only
Yeah.
detect it if there's a technologically advanced civilization and sending us signals. But
Yeah.
if that is rare, then we are not in contact, or they don't want to be in contact with us.
Yeah, I think that's very likely. I mean, if there's something out there, we haven't shown anything that entices them. to contact us. I think.
Well,
So yeah. Go ahead.
look, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think we are something very special on our
Yeah.
planet because it will not be very often that you have just a global biosphere like we do, and there's all different kind of animals and intelligent organisms, and so I think we are there something special that doesn't happen too often.
We are real zoo. And so, in that sense, the zoo hypothesis sort of holds in the sense that, yeah, something interesting here. Yeah, let's just keep it contained, so that they can see if something interesting happens. So yeah, so going back to this idea, so you're not really impressed by the Miller-Urey experiment from Chicago, that showed, you could create these building blocks, but you think the probability of those things assembling into life is still very, very small, right? If I understood you correctly.
Yes, well, the Miller-Urey experiment just showed that you can get some amino acids, but the amino acids you can get also from space. This is
Yeah.
far from the complexity you need for a cell. See, the problem I see is, in order to have a functional life form, you need some kind of a membrane to keep your enclosures away from the outside environment.
Mm.
You need something that produces energy, which in our body it's proteins. But it could be something more primitive, but it has to do the same function. And then you need something like a nucleotide, like RNA or DNA, that does replicate things. And all the three things have to work together. If you only have one of three or two of three, it just all falls apart again.
Yeah.
And it has to work together in a very short time period, because otherwise it breaks apart, and under a very small spatial content that it works and keep it together. And I always have this kind of difficulty to imagine, why would they work together? They just chemicals, right?
Yeah.
How do you get there something that is life, that actually works together? And I think that this is something that is actually quite challenging and maybe very rare.
So it's sort of intelligent design. I don't use that term in the colloquial sense, but it does require some very, very low probability events to come together in unison for that to happen. That makes it very unlikely, you're saying, right?
Well, I mean, the thing is, from my understanding, I think it's very challenging. So the chance is 1 over a very big number, but then you have you have a whole planet with zillions of microenvironments where things can come together, and probably in the universe you have zillions of planets. So you have a near infinite possibility. So you have kind of, if you want to calculate that, you have infinity over infinity, and anything can come out of it. It can be one, it can be a huge number. We just don't know it, but it's a crucial point. If we know that, we can kind of understand how frequent life is in the universe, how often you would find complex life. So that's why it's so critical, if we do space exploration, that we actually find another example of life. Because if we find another example of life in our solar system already, then we know life is common in the universe, but it has to be from a separate origin. Because if you find life on Mars, it could still be the same origin as on Earth, with rocks going from one planet to the other or so. But if you find something, for example, on Titan, it's a very different environment, then then we would conclude life is common. Complex life, maybe not as much, we have to see, but at least life is common.
Yeah, so we cannot even put a probability on the origination. And I always felt that, so we have Titan Enceladus, and Europa, and you say, oh, these moons have great environments, they have water, they have stretching, and they have heat generated, they have thermo nuclear heat generated. So there should be life there. Okay, so that's the hypothesis. And you send something out there and you say, I didn't find anything. And then you say, well, there is so many exo moons out there. This doesn't mean anything. So there is a posterior probability. So if you argue that X is equal to Y, or, I'm going to go measure if X is equal to Y, and I find X is not equal to Y, then I say, well, there is so many other possibilities. So I'm going to go look for something else. That doesn't work in statistics. It never worked in statistics. And so if you don't find anything in the solar system, we haven't found anything, that should tell us that origination is not that easy, right? That's my bias. I'll just let you react to it.
Um, I wouldn't say not necessarily. I think there's maybe it pointing a little bit toward it, that it's not extremely easy. But you see, so it depends really under which conditions the life can originate. If you need a planetary surface where you have a tidal flats, or you have the hydrothermal water on the surface, and you have the drying and wetting cycles, and so that it can only originate on the planetary surface, then it actually can only originate on Earth and on Mars, and maybe long time ago Venus, but it's not there anymore. And it cannot originate on the icy moons. The icy moons have only a viable chance if life originated actually at those hydrothermal vents in the deep ocean. If that is the case, some people say that or think that life originated in the deep oceans on Earth at the black smokers, where the black smokers are. If that is true, then we have a good chance to find it maybe on Europa at least. Enceladus, I'm quite sure, but Europa. And but if the origin of life can only occur on a planetary surface, that we don't find it in on the icy moons would be to be expected. But that doesn't mean that the origin of life has to be very rare, because there's probably still a lot of planets out with good conditions or benign conditions on the planetary surface.
Yeah, but this is still based on one observation. So it's ironic that you need, so our assumption is that you need water to sort of get molecules together to form life, but then it has to get out of water into some sort of a rocky surface so that it can evolve into more complex things. But all of these assumptions are based on one observation, isn't it? I mean, are we sort of on the wrong track in looking for extraterrestrials? Is what I'm wondering. Yeah.
Of course, you're right. It's on one observation, but we do have, chemical laws, physical laws, and biological, say, tendencies. Don't want to call them necessarily laws. And one thing is, where you push the water. I think, water is difficult for life actually to start with, because you need to have organic synthesis. If you want to put two amino acids together to a peptide, you have to expel a water molecule. And having to do that in water energetically doesn't work very well.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
So, and if you think about it, what do we use water for? We wash our hands because it is all organics, right?
Yeah.
If you put it all the way through, I can say, well, maybe not there's life because of water, but maybe despite of water, right? Life found a way around it because there were areas or regions where it originated where it was pretty dry.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then,
So
go ahead.
Certainly, Dr. So this is a good segue to one of your other papers. So time to consider search strategies for complex life on exoplanets. So you say here the search for life on the thousands of exoplanets that have been discovered. in recent decades has focused primarily on detecting the chemical signatures of microbial life. Suggestions have been made to look for atmospheric biosignatures ranging from ozone to methyl chloride, or the concurrent presence of both reducing and oxidizing gases in the atmosphere, such as molecular oxygen and methane on Earth. Um, and so, I mean, our technologies are not good enough to go see dinosaurs roaming on some planet out there yet.
Would be
But we
cool.
have some. Say it again, sorry.
Would be cool though if we could, right?
And so, but we have some technologies that, sort of, I mean, we could look at the spectra, we could analyze some chemicals, and we could make some assumptions or speculations from it. So what are the search strategies that you're suggesting for exoplanets?
Well, I mean, it is a challenge, right? Maybe to start with, it is very difficult to prove life from a distance.
Yeah.
Yes. So I mean, the same thing. I was at some point in a committee to discuss find life on Europa or within Europa,
Mm.
and then I pushed that we need a lander. You cannot use the mosquito tactic to find life.
Yes.
To took it from the just swirling around the planet. You have to get close and personal, and actually land it, and maybe then melt some water and see what is in that water,
Yep.
and drill a little bit deeper if you can. So I think from a distance it's very difficult. And even if we have a rock, I had earlier today with an astrobiologist a discussion. If you have a 4 billion-year-old rock from Earth, we have a lot of problems to say, is there life in it? Was there life in it? Are those structures, stromatolites, for example, those wavy patterns that are built up by microbes, is that really by microbes, or is that some kind of sedimentary layer because there was some water flowing in a funny direction or so?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that will be very difficult. And you may have noticed people who claim that they have found life, in the Martian meteorite or wherever, they're just being thrown stuff at it and say, no, 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 you haven't. Now, if you now look at the exoplanets,
Yeah.
we will have way less evidence for it because we just see a spectrum and say, well, there's probably tons of different solutions how to get the spectrum without life.
Mm.
Right? So we really need to work on it, what we look for.
Mm.
I mean, personally, at this stage, I would only consider evidence if we find on one exoplanet tons of chlorophyll,
Yeah.
right? Because so many photosynthetic organisms.
Yeah.
But even that will be very difficult because on Earth, there's different types of chlorophylls. They all look a little bit different. And then you could do photosynthesis also with other chemical compounds like rhodopsins or carotenoids.
Mm.
So that is other organic chemicals. So it doesn't have to be necessarily chlorophyll.
Mm.
So, and it's everything getting then very complicated.
Yeah.
And I do not really think that in the next decade or so, people can make really a proof of life based on the remote detection of exoplanets.
Mm.
If there's technologically advanced life and they respond, of course, that can happen.
Yeah.
That can occur. But otherwise, I think only we can do it in our own solar system because we can land and look at something and analyze it and can get our sophisticated laboratories to it and really looking deeply into it. The other
Yeah.
thing, too, just one more thing to
Yeah.
add.
Yeah.
If you look at exoplanets, we
Yeah.
do not know their natural history. What
Yeah.
has happened there before? On our planet, with Mars, looks like a barren planet right now, but we know
Right.
4 billion years ago it had lots of water on it, it has volcanoes, it was active and all that.
Yeah.
So we know kind of where to put it. With the exoplanets, we have no clue. We just
Yeah.
have this moment in time where we see it in a spectrum.
Yeah, this is definitely a needle in a haystack. So the exoplanet has to be developing life at the right time so that we can see it at the right time. I mean, it's nearly impossible for that to happen. Um, and so how do we go about this? So um, would you say, sort of the plants, um, chlorophyll and converting sunlight into energy potentially more frequent in the universe. I can't quite remember this, Dirk. So there was something sort of red edge or something. We can we sort of look at the spectra coming from planets and say there are plants there or something like that?
Um, yeah, well, on Earth you have those red edge, which is very characteristic.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, it is an indication. If I see something on an exoplanet, I think, well, I'm getting excited too, right?
Yes.
But it's not a proof. We
Yeah.
would need more than that.
And we
If
cannot go there. I mean, we just have to confirm it with data. Yeah.
Right. Well, it depends a little bit how far it is away. I mean, if it's within 20 light years, you can still see, okay, maybe if we find some light sail that's just accelerates to 20% of
Mm.
light velocity, and then, at least, our children maybe can have some kind of confirmation. Um, so, but in principle, yes, if we do not have a leap in technology, it will be very difficult. And but we would kind of try to develop technology that we can still better look at it. But to get a proof for that would be incredibly difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still with Einstein. Speed of light, and that guy, put a damper on this whole thing. I mean, otherwise we could we could have gone places by now. Um, and so we are sort of constrained in many ways. And like you say, so there has to be some life at some distance. It has to be precisely at the time that light reaches us at this point, and there are so many minute probabilities that get multiplied on this process. I think we are sort of cooked, so to speak. Yeah.
Um, well, yeah, if they are at the same stage as we are, but perhaps they are further developed, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they have some technology. I mean, for example, can use some gravitational lensing where they really can see us much better, and or find out some other kind of tricks. It's kind of still amazing.
Mm.
Um, we shouldn't exclude anything a priori. I mean, think
Yeah.
about it now. If we just think about 100 years ago, people wouldn't have thought, or maybe 150 years ago, that someone with Apollo mission, people walked on the moon, that it would be even possible.
Yeah.
So we have to be careful. I think there's good arguments to say that, light velocity, we cannot go more than that. But,
Yeah.
the last word on that is not spoken either. So
Yeah.
it looks like this right now, but
Yeah.
that is not 100% proof that it cannot be done. I mean, we
Yeah.
would have
Yeah.
distort space, I guess, change space.
Yeah. I mean, that's an important point, Dirk. Um, so the status quo information is not perfect. Um, and most of it is, I would argue, is wrong. And so at some point, we're going to get better information. We're going to think about it differently. And so, from an education perspective, you're an educator. So, I want to ask you, outside your research, how would you get kids to keep an open mind? Because we are fed. so much information as precise and known. And how do you get kids to say, let me test it statistically and, or let me think about it differently? Yeah, it's become a very difficult skill.
Um, it is difficult. I mean, always question your teacher. Don't believe everything right away.
Yeah.
And whether that makes sense to you, what is taught. And see, I came from a geoscience background and went into biology. And so I came up with kind of how alternative energy sources maybe could be used by life, like magnetic energy or osmotic gradients or stuff like that. And when I gave a talk at one conference, the session chair came to me down and said, "Who is paying for that?" You know, but I just had fun with it and calculating and thinking out of the box.
Yeah.
So, and I think a lot of biologists have the danger to become narrow-minded because, they're studying how biology works on our planet. But then the next step should be, or, for astrobiologists at least, to think, okay, how could it work differently? Of course, that is a level even more difficult, right? We have already difficulties enough to figure out how cells, cellular processes, how biology work on our planet. And then we think, okay, how would it on an alien world work? Could it work? But again, you have some hints, For example, cyanide is for us very poisonous, right? But
We found a lake. We found a lake in Arizona or something with a lot of cyanide, and we thought there was an organism that uses cyanide. That was a long time ago.
well, that was, I think you mean that was the arsenic, was that, which came out that it's not as a researcher proposed it was, but arsenic is to some degree actually used to, for metabolism, for example, and some microbes use it. But the point what I want to make is with the cyanide, it's toxic to us. Why is it so toxic? Because it interferes with our organic metabolism, with our biochemical processing. But that means actually it is a good organic compound. So, other life could be, for example, using the cyanide much more. That wouldn't work very well now if they would be visiting us on our planet or vice versa. But so with that gives us some hints. So it is not that we have a very good grasp on what is possible, and a lot of the speculation, but certain things gives you hints.
Yeah. And so I want to finish up with something very tactical. Was there an early habitability window for Earth's moon? So in this paper, you say our moon is uninhabitable and lifeless today. It has no significant atmosphere, no liquid water on its surface, no magnetosphere to protect its surface from solar wind and cosmic radiation, no polymeric chemistry, and it is subject of large diurnal temperature variations. That's associating our moon with habitability seems outrageous, and certainly it would have been just a decade ago. So, but you are equating moon to habitability. So, what's the argument here?
Well, it is kind of interesting because not only you feel like this, but the editor who we sent the paper to, he came back and said, I have a very difficult time to find reviewers who take your hypothesis serious. Now, but why is that? Because we see a dead rock in space. We see it today, right? But if you look at the moon, there's this dark patches, and that are mare, that are basaltic outflows. So at that time, about 3.5 billion years ago, there was a lot of volcanic outpouring on the moon. So it is estimated that built up an atmosphere of about 10 millibar. That's 1/100th of the atmosphere on Earth, but it's still more than what is on Mars today. And so there was water with it too. And that gases were carbon monoxide and hydrogen sulfide, not what we like, but a lot of microbes, bacteria are doing very well with it.
Mm.
So we had an atmosphere at that time. And Earth and Moon at that time was much closer to each other. And we know that at that time we already had life on our planet. So if you have an asteroid slamming into Earth, spreading things, pushing things on the Moon, where there were puddles of water and a tenuous, gas atmosphere, but still an atmosphere, then there could have been at that time life on the Moon. And if you go even further back, very early on, the Moon was so close to the Earth that maybe they even had a common kind of an atmosphere. Nobody knows what exactly how that was at that time. But if we want to find life too, we have to look into the past, how things changed with time.
Yeah.
So if there was life in some of the primordial puddles on the Moon, it probably was not there for long. It's relative what's long, for a few million years before it went out and the Moon lost all the rest of the atmosphere and was gone. But for some time, I can't prove it, but I would, given that there was at that point quite a lot of life already on our planet, only microbial life, I would bet that at some point there was an asteroid and that put some life on the Moon just for a temporary time period. I would take bets for that. But of course, I'm not then alive anymore until, at some point when someone
it's a hypothesis. The problem with single cell organisms is that they don't leave any fossils.
Right.
And hence we can really determine precisely. So so I want to finish up with, so based on everything that you have done, everything that you studied, let me show my bias. I think the Milky Way doesn't have anything. So I'm against the zoo hypothesis. If it had something, we would have seen it in some ways, I think. So where do you come out on that? Just in the Milky Way context, is there somebody out there, something out there?
Well, it's who said that? Maybe Carl Sagan. It's a huge amount of real estate there, and for them, nothing out there. I don't know what would be more scary, that we are the only life form in the Milky Way or in the universe, than that there's other life forms out there. If we are the only ones, really, you very well may be correct, right? We don't know. But if that is the case, what horrible responsibility on us that we are the only life form and we kind of screwing around with our planet and maybe short before extinction or so. That would I hope it's not like that. I hope that there's other examples of life and some life forms do better than we do.
Yeah, but that supposes we are good. So for instance, all the hominids who has happened on Earth, evidence tells us that Neanderthals were, much more gentle people. Homo sapiens wanted to kill and pillage, and that is the thing that survived. So I'm not actually that fond of Homo sapiens in general, so why should we sustain ourselves?
You have to look into biology though too. We are not the worst not by any means. Lion cubs always kill the cubs from the other lion when they take over the pride, for example. And chimpanzees are much worse than us. Much more brutal.
That is true. Yeah.
Bonobos, they solve everything with sex, so they may be more gentle than that. So we are somewhere in the middle, I would say, and it's kind of a balance. We are living in nature. We had to push through to survive the predators and get through. So we need also this kind of what many would say kind of negative attributes of us to actually make it. But then we need also the one that working together. We need both kumbaya and competition. We need the right balance of it, you know, and not.
Yes.
So and I think anywhere else, if there's highly developed organisms like us, it will be probably very similar. It will be a very tight balance between extinction and technological and emotional and ethical progress. It's difficult. It's very difficult for any species.
Yeah. So this is not in your research, Dirk. I just want to get your perspective on this. So if we have automatons, and that's where we're going with artificial intelligence in some ways, that has some specific objective function, which is localized objective function. What made Homo sapiens thrive is society. It is sort of combining objective functions in a multitude of ways, and so that combination is what got us here. So, I mean, you can have a very efficient organism with a very localized, specific objective function that could thrive, but it's not going to create society, right? So, this is my worst fear of artificial intelligence. Um, yeah, you can program all sorts of stuff into a machine, but the machine doesn't understand collaboration, society, and all of that. It's pretty useless in grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I mean, what I can say to it, you know, from a biological perspective, I know that there's a fear that AI may take over and all that, but we shouldn't underestimate, you know, 4 billion years of evolution.
Yeah.
I mean, we are very efficient, you know, to put all this computing power in this little brain, you know, of ours. That is quite a feat. And in a lot of things, we are still better than AI. I don't know, it could be that at some point we are not anymore, but don't underestimate biology and evolution. It's a very powerful tool.
Excellent. Yeah, this has been great, Dirk. Yeah, thanks so much for spending time with me.
Thank you for having me. It's a
Thank you.
pleasure.